You are a genius.
But wait a second. How do you know that?
Everyone is a genius. We just often have been shamed for our gifts and strengths. And so we don't tend to develop our uniqueness in this world. Most of us don't know what that is.
So we've invested the next 4 podcasts into exploring your genius.
In a world where achievements and accolades motivate us to do more and be more, we're often left wondering, is this really it?
Deep inside, you know there is more to life. You're ready to leave behind the old, push your way through, and claim the deeper life that's calling you.
That's where we excel.
We're your hosts, Stephanie Allen,
And Maren Stephanie.
and this is the Soulful Leader Podcast.
Sit back and relax as we share the shortcuts we've uncovered to help you make shift happen.
Welcome back to the Soulful Leader Podcast. We are on week 3. Actually, we're on week 4 of our series. So our first one was talking about the overview of, why profile testing, personality testing, and how you can actually use it to refine yourself instead of define yourself. Week 1, we talked about dynamo energy. Week 2, we talked about blaze energy. And this week, we're talking about tempo energy.
In tempos, I really, really value tempos. Being in the healing field that I work in, to have somebody who can slow things down and be very practical. And we can all be practical, right? In different ways. But as a tempo, there's something very nourishing, something very grounded. You can often say, like, the dynamo energies are the what's going to happen, asking the question what. And it's like their head is in the clouds and they see a big vision and a big possibility. Tempos are the opposite. They have their feet on the earth. So they're able to take something, a big concept, and then ground it and plan it out more step by step, more detailed oriented.
I love that. So we have been giving a quality and a word, like the question. So the question that dynamos ask is what? The question that blazes ask is who? The question that tempo energy asks is when.
And where?
When and where, right? They want to know
Mhm.
the details. Oftentimes I'll mention when we go to Google Maps, most of the time there's this big overview of Google Maps. And so we'll look at the overview. And then when we want to actually take the trip, we ask it for turn by turn directions. And the overview becomes a like very on the ground, this is next, this is next, this is next. And I think of that with, you just mentioned the dynamo's head in the cloud and tempo's feet on the ground. That's to me the real tempo energy. They slow everything down. They're in the present moment. They're great with timing. And that planning of turn by turn, what's next, where are we going, and when are we, how, it's like that the timing thing is so accurate. Oftentimes people who are traders, highly successful traders, are tempo energy because they're so good with timing and understanding the ins and outs of timing. Whereas the dynamo energy, they have a much larger vision of it. It's not as condensed and accurate.
Yeah. So sometimes, if you might relate to being a tempo person, you may have been projected onto from others that you're procrastinating, you're taking too long to make a decision, or you are asking the questions like, well, when is that going to happen? And where are we going to do that? That tends to be, in a team meeting, sometimes you can look at tempo energies and go, oh, for God's sake, can't you like just get the big picture and away we go and get excited about this? That would be like a dynamo blaze type of people going, well, what's the matter with you? Right. But, the tempo is so important because they're like the triage. So if you're going into a hospital situation and you have an emergency waiting room filled with all kinds of different injuries and illnesses, a tempo person is very good at able to crisis management, saying, okay, this person who's having a heart attack, they're up first. I don't care if they just, they just got here. It doesn't matter. They have the most immediacy need, and they can actually triage things. So they can put things in a really good order about what has to happen next, and then next, and then next. And so sometimes they can slow things down enough that you're like, well, what do you mean? Can't we get that idea out like by next week? And a temple person will say, do you have any idea
Hmm.
of all the things that need to happen in order to make that happen? You have no idea, do you? And and it can be very frustrating to dynamos and to blaze people, because they're like, well, we already have the idea. We already know who it's for. What's your problem? They're like, yeah, but there's a where and when that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. It's very it's practical, and that's where the work gets grounded. So
Mhm.
one of the things that we've talked about is, it starts with the idea and then it goes to the people and then it has to get grounded. And the tempo people that you mentioned how essential they are, they help us to ground it. And without that, it stays up in the clouds and it always is just an idea. It never actually comes to fruition. So I think that the shame piece of like, oh, you're so practical, like
Stop being
every
realistic.
right. Every single one of the energies has something where we've taken our gift and we put it into shame. And I think that that's one of those things for temple people of like, I don't want to be practical. Yeah, yeah, but it's so great. Thank you for
Yeah.
being practical, right? We need that. We need you to ground us, you know?
Yeah. So if you're a dynamo energy, actually it's really helpful to have a temple person on your team or in your family or whatever it is, because they're the ones that are going to say, "Well, that's a great idea. When is that going to happen?" Like they're kind of the accountability partner. Like, "Well, when is that going to happen? Or where is that going to happen?" Like so that we can plan it.
Right.
Because dynamo energies aren't so wonderful about planning ideas. They're like, "Yeah, well, I came up with the idea. I'm good to go. I'm on my next idea already." Whereas maybe not always, but tempo energies aren't necessarily coming up with ideas, but they're very creative with the plans about what needs to happen next or who needs to come on board. That would be more blaze, of course, but it's so great to be able to plant the seed. So kind of the idea of like, you're thinking of springtime, a creator or a dynamo energy person would say, "Hey, this is what I want to plant in my garden this year." Well, you wouldn't just go out and plant all the seeds all at once. There's a timing. There's a right timing. Some need to be planted in the fall. Some things need to be planted after the frost. So there's a timing on when everything is going to root into the system. That's a tempo energy. A tempo kind of knows the seasons and the changes and when the best time is to implement something or to talk about something or to take it apart or plan it.
And speaking of seasons, so each of the energies has got a season to it too. And we mentioned that the dynamo is spring energy and blaze is that summer outward, always going kind of energy and lots of variety. And then tempo energy is autumn. And autumn is when we reap things, right? And we reap the benefits. And that's what the grounding of something does. When you plant the seed, like the dynamo person will look at it and be like, grow. It hasn't grown yet. Whereas the tempo person is like, okay, we got our plan, we got everything planted, we're good. And now we're into harvest. And so it's that harvest energy. The other thing we've been giving people is the Chinese medicine equivalent. Would you be able to share
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So because it's an earth energy, so it relates to stomach and spleen. And if you think of autumn, well, that's the time we have Thanksgiving. At least here in the West, we have Thanksgiving in the autumn, and we come together and we nourish each other.
Hmm.
And we celebrate the harvest. So there's a slowing down. It's also a gathering time so that we can start to plan for the winter that's coming. So we can put things away in its right time so that we can be sustained through that that darker night, that darker inward time of winter, which is what we'll talk about next time on the steel energy. But it's like that's the link the tempo energy has in the way of the earth energy, mothering. You think of earth, mother earth, me. How are we taking care of ourselves and each other?
Hmm.
That is a tempo energy. And, in Chinese medicine, stomach and spleen is a lot about, sweetness, too much, too little, finding that right balance, and not just sweetness. We tend to go for food sweetness, but how can we be sweet with ourselves? So our inner dialogue of being able to be, we tend to, when it's out of balance, we tend to be thinking too much. We get up into our head and we remunerate things, and that can create procrastination. But it can also be, as a tempo energy, it can be looking at that thinking element, which is earth energy in autumn, of being able to process something and say, well, what are the structures? What are the next steps? And what has to be in place? And what has to happen before that happens? And they're really good at reverse engineering. So that would also be, instead of thinking too much or worrying too much, to turn it into something that's more balanced or more in harmony, is to be able to be creative and to be able to be nurturing. What needs to be said?
Yeah, so turning that over, because that's one of those things that all of us tend to, whatever energy we're in, we can go to the, I guess, the dark side of it, right? Where we overdo and we overthink and we overanalyze and we over care or whatever it is. So flipping that around and saying, you know what, this is actually a gift and a blessing, and how do we take that to the higher story of all of it?
Yeah, there's a great level of patience that tempo energies have. And I think they, for the tempos that I know, I think they beat themselves up a lot in the way of shaming themselves, of saying they're procrastinators. And that can be true too. So, I mean, we all can be procrastinators, but it tends to get shamed because they're trying to slow things down and to really process things. I call them processors. They're more processing and looking at what are the structures that need to be in place that will lead to success of the vision of what wants to happen.
I love that. So don't forget that on our website, we do have all of the energies. And so if you're interested in finding out more about any of the energies, you can go there. You can take a free test to find out your energy. It's called the Genius Test. And we have a download there. So you can go to our website, tslp.life, stands for the Soulful Leader Project, .life, not .com, but .life, tslp.life. And you can also find us on Facebook and on LinkedIn under the Soulful Leaders. If you have any questions, be sure to contact us. We'll see you next week. We're doing Steel Energy, and we can't wait to see you there.
And that wraps up another episode of the Soulful Leader Podcast with your hosts, Stephanie Allen
and Maren Oslack. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to dive deeper, head over to our website at thesoulfulleaderpodcast.com.
Until next time.